Welcome to our first podcast for the season 3 of the Student Experience podcast. Joining us today is the lovely Ailsa Lamont from Pomegranate Global. Ailsa is an education professional. She's had about 30 years experience in international education, social innovation and capacity building roles across more than 70 countries, which kind of is very awe-inspiring for me. I've not been to 70 countries, so I'm very impressed. For 16 years, she worked in a variety of roles, particularly around international recruitment, and also then moved into climate change, became a climate reality leader through Al Gore's program. She's an accomplished speaker, and she's presented, debated, and facilitated events around the world. In 2020, she was appointed a senior fellow at NAFSA, which I'm not sure what that stands for, so hopefully Ailsa will enlighten us on that one. And it's very much around developing, defining, supporting and integrating sustainable practices in the field of international education. So welcome, Ailsa.
Thank you very much for that, Tanya. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
So NAFSA, what's NAFSA stand for?
You just made me actually go to my phone to Google because I realized that I've forgotten what the acronym actually stands for. I'll have to check that later, but I absolutely know what NAFSA is. It's basically the largest international education peak body or association in the world, headquartered in Washington, DC. Obviously, its kind of core is in the US and North America, but it's really got global reach. And they run a major conference every year, probably, or used to until recently. It was about 10,000 people coming from all over the world. And they're kind of one of the thought leaders and knowledge providers for the whole international education sector.
Awesome. And well, congratulations on your recognition as Senior Fellow.
Thanks very much. There are 5 of us from around the world, and it's actually great because NAFSA it's on the topic of sustainability and climate action. So this is a reflection of the fact that NAFSA has really started to take this seriously, which is quite a shift from the way that most of the peak bodies were looking at this topic until quite recently.
Excellent. So I guess my first question is going to be around the climate change work. So why is climate change work important from a student's perspective, and which students actually care, or do all students care? Sure.
So it's a really interesting question that kind of goes to the nub of the matter. So, I mean, there's setting aside for a moment the very real issue of the fact that climate change is going to affect all of us. In many cases, it already is affecting us. And so everybody really should care. There's also the climate justice issue, which is that the people who are already being the most disproportionately impacted are those in lower income countries, poorer parts of developed countries. Although it should be said that Australia is actually the rich country that is most at risk of the dreadful, potentially catastrophic impacts of climate change. So there's that one, which, setting that aside for the moment, even though that is kind of one of the key issues, and going back to your question about students. So the evidence around this is patchy because we haven't been asking the question specifically enough. What we do know is that generally, every survey of young people's attitudes shows that they absolutely care about the environment, about what's happening with this heating world, and we see that with the school strikes and the millions of students of young people around the world who went on strike and protested around that. And of course, they are going to be the students of higher education institutions in a year or two, if not already. So there's that, and there are a lot of surveys and research that also demonstrate that young people in particular are prepared to switch brand if they perceive something to have a stronger stance on environmental issues. but not many of the kind of student surveys or international student attitudes research tended to look very much at this issue. So that's been changing a little over the last year or two. More and more of the surveys have started to insert questions around this topic. So what we do know, though, for example, from student surveys that have been run in the UK by the National Union of Students for a number of years, is that the vast majority, it's usually somewhere around the 80 to 90% of students, want to see their institutions taking stronger action on climate. So that's in the UK. Individual institutions, for example, the University of Tasmania here has run a similar survey for its own students and found very similar results. But one of the issues here is that even when students show that they care, they haven't had a particular way to match up that care, that concern with individual institutions, because until recently there wasn't actually a kind of green ranking of universities or institutions, but now there is. So just about 2 years ago, the Times Higher Education ranking, so that's one of the big three. There's the Times Higher Ed, QS, the Shanghai Jiaotong. The Times Higher Ed decided to introduce a new ranking looking at impact. So they actually rate institutions based on their performance against the SDGs, the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, including climate action. So it's still, it's only had 2 full years, but it's growing rapidly and it's really gaining traction. So I think that the whole kind of smorgasbord of being able to see from a student perspective where is actually taking climate action seriously, and then being able to orientate your purchasing decisions or your study destination decisions towards that is going to shift behaviour quite substantially. So that's what we know about how some students care. But because I work primarily with international students, and your audience obviously works with different parts of the education field, I want to talk a little bit about those students who are not necessarily turned on to the climate issue yet. So, there has been a kind of an assumption that if you've got students who come from, Northern Europe, Scandinavia, Germany, that they will be really switched on about climate issues and they will care, and that perhaps students from China or India or Vietnam might not care so much. And I think that is really a misinterpretation, especially when you look at where students really are being impacted. So, students in many parts of India in particular have really felt the impact of whether it's floods or droughts or heat waves or air pollution, and obviously many other parts of the world as well. So there's a growing awareness and a growing drive to really do something about it in many of those countries. But the kind of what we perhaps in Australia see as the traditional kind of, often a wee bit liberal, lefty activist, there maybe hasn't been quite so much of that in some of those countries, but that doesn't mean the sentiment isn't there. And one of the things that I've found the most kind of enlightening and really, really reassuring is that when I've worked with groups of international students, from all over, but from China, from Vietnam, wherever, people who've said beforehand that they didn't really think about climate issues, it wasn't really a concern for them, and they've kind of been forced to come to one of my sessions, and literally all it takes is about an hour and a half of actually putting kind of solid, digestible facts in front of them about the impact on them and the impact on where they are now and on their home countries and what they can do about it. And that's really important, like giving people practical things that they can do about it. And honestly, you just see the switch. People can be so easily turned on to doing something about it, and they get that sense of agency, and they can really get quite excited. So it's fabulous to see.
Great. And I think you really touched on a valid point. We have so many assumptions around who does and who doesn't, and make decisions based on assumptions which really have no actual founding on anything really, except, you know, how we perceive people's behaviours from a distance filtered through our news services. So yeah, I think it's a really critical reminder that we actually have to be connecting with the humans that are our students and not just the sort of perceived grouping.
Absolutely.
So appreciating that employers are now looking for more than just a degree, because more and more people have a degree. How do we differentiate? One of the big things that I know students are starting to become more aware of is that need to be involved in activities, and particularly activities that make a difference. So how can universities look to build that change maker experience into the student experience?
Yeah, that's another great question. And obviously, you know, I know that from our past working together on social innovation projects, I was hoping that we might get to cover this whole change making skills idea, and that goes to the core of all of this too. It's about the student experience, about employability, and how I position climate action within universities, within institutions, is it doesn't have to be an either or. You can really build this into your existing employability programs, your student buddy programs, your community engagement programs, and you can do it in a way that actually adds value. So, I mean, you started asking about employers, and there are a couple of aspects to that question I want to touch on. One is that, you know, absolutely engaging with climate change and looking at potential solutions and what you can do on an individual basis, but also on an organizational or a more systemic basis. I mean, that goes to the heart of critical thinking and complex problem solving. And in fact, you couldn't get a better kind of experimental environment to play with, because this is a problem that really is, you know, it's the kind of ultimate wicked problem. It involves, you have to have teamwork to solve it. You have to have people with a wide variety of different skills, backgrounds, attitudes all coming together. So I actually, when I've worked with groups of students who have been engaging with this issue and looking at what they can do, it's fantastic to see just how creative they can be, how innovative they can be, but also that because it's a real problem with the ticking clock, it kind of brings them back to, you have to be practical, you have to then work out a way to apply this. So I do think that being involved in this topic is really a great way to help develop critical skills for students. More than that though, from the employer side, I've just been doing some work with the university business school in France, and they are now embedding eco-literacy, as they're calling it, in the whole curriculum for the business school. It's a really top business school, University of Strasbourg, and they're saying, well, you know, how on earth can we say that we have top graduates going out into the world if they're not equipped to tackle this existential challenge, which is basically going to go to the heart of what business has to deal with over the next few years. And we're already seeing this massive switch that business is, in fact, in many cases, leading governments in deciding to take action because they can see the risk. They see the financial risk. They also see the way the markets are going. So it's really a kind of, it's a win-win from both sides when you actually do inject climate issues into your employability and other programs in institutions.
And I think when you touched on the work that we did previously together, when we were collaborating to get Seeker University as the first to show KU Changemaker Campus, I think that kind of concept is a really great example of how you can bring something into a university and really help define who you are and stand out from the pack, essentially. And then your students then stand out from the pack because they have something different to offer that they don't get from somewhere else. So yeah, really, we had a great time. It was good.
Yeah, it was. It's really, and if I could just add on that, I think that whole Ashoka U Changemaker framework is a really good model for institutions to adopt for putting in climate action. And I also want to make a point that, you know, higher education institutions I say we, because I worked there for so long, you know, but the whole sector is supposed to be, and it is, leading the way in knowledge creation and research and innovation. And yet, and this is a problem, I suppose, that we often come up against with, you know, a failure to apply the research. There's kind of a failure in joined up thinking when it comes to tackling climate change. So individual institutions might be doing the most fabulous work around the climate, the environmental science research, looking at technical solutions, and yet very few of them ever seem to join all the dots and say, we should be doing everything in our power to really drive change. And if we did across the board, what would that look like? And it would look like something very different to what we have now. And it would involve institutions looking at all of their operations and trying to actually reduce greenhouse gas emissions associated with that. And more than that, it would involve them really looking at every single lever that they had to pull, every opportunity they had to influence or advocate and educate. I mean, the fact that there are students going through our institutions today in Australia and around the world, and they can graduate without a basic comprehension of what is happening with climate change is actually just incredible to me, because that just seems like such a massive failure.
Particularly, as you say, it does impact on everyone and everything that we do. A really great question there. Now I've forgotten it. Damn it!
I'll go with an average question.
Well, I think what you talk about is really good. I think it leads really nicely into talking a bit about the work that you do at Pomegranate Global and also the work that you do with Canny. So if you want to give us a little bit of a picture of what each of those is, and I guess I see them as a really good example of you know, how you can apply that passion for, you know, implementing your research and making a difference. And I've just remembered what my other statement was, and it was about when we're talking about, you know, looking at all the different levers that we have in climate change, is that it's very similar to like a lean thinking approach. You work through every single step and you kind of go, okay, well, what elements are actually influencing this, and what are the things that we can do and actually doing something about it? And I know that you do that sort of stuff in your work. So Pomegranate and Canny, tell us about them.
Brilliant, thank you. Yes, so I suppose, you know, when I started Pomegranate about 4 or 5 years ago, it was really, it was a reaction to the fact that I'd absorbed so many of the lessons around social innovation and change making, and you know, part of that was, if you see the need for change and you think you can do something about it, you should go and do it. And I think that's what leadership actually is. And I could see there was this need for the higher education sector to essentially get back to its kind of core purpose, or what I see as its core purpose, of not just giving people an education to get them a job at the end, but to be, you know, global citizens, to be good citizens that actually help improve the sum of life on this earth for their community or wherever they happen to be. And I do feel that that can help students learn better when they're doing the learning for a purpose. And it obviously, and I think, you know, we could possibly agree on this, when you're engaged in that work, even in an institution, it gives more meaning to your own work and it adds extra value. So I left and set up Pomegranate, and I knew I wanted to make it a company that would help institutions help their students, primarily international students, because that's my main kind of focus, but not only international students. And by developing programs that would have some kind of social or environmental purpose. And to be honest, I almost started it around homelessness. But it was a former colleague of mine, of ours from CK University, Rob MacDonald, who's gone on to become a published author, by the way. Check out his book, The Nancies, who had done an MBA project looking at the carbon footprint of international education. And so I had that kind of core research to start from. So I thought, well, okay, I'll start looking at that. And I spent about 4 months developing a workshop, which I ran on, this was just for the public, on climate issues and awareness and what you as an individual could do. And I look back on it now, and it was honestly horrible. I'm so glad that only 4 people turned up. And I feel, I see one of them every so often, and I apologize to him. And I came away from that literally thinking, I am never doing anything like this again. I kind of overdosed on the climate doomism and catastrophe, which you have to have a bit of that. You have to show what the impact is going to be, but I kind of focused too much on that and not enough on what you can do about it. Anyway, a good lesson learned. And that night, I honestly felt shattered. I was like, I'm not going to do anything on this again. This is just dreadful. That night, I had this dream that I was on a raft and the waters were rising, and I had a megaphone, and I'm going around and I'm shouting to everyone, you've got to do something, people, you've got to do something. And I woke up and I went, oh, shit. And so then when I was still lying in bed, I checked my email on my iPad. Bad idea, don't do it. But anyway, and there was this email from Al Gore's foundation, the Climate Reality Project, which I'd been following to access resources. And it said, apply for climate reality leadership training with Al Gore. And I was like, okay. So before I even got out of bed, I sent off this application, didn't think any more about it, never thought it would happen. And then about a month later, I got this email saying, yeah, come to Pittsburgh. And I was like, oh, Pittsburgh, is that the only option? They're like, yep. I'm like, okay. So I went to Pittsburgh, and that was just incredible. I mean, there were like, hundreds, 800 or so people mainly from the US, but from all over the world for 4 days. And being part of that group and that energy was just quite, I've never experienced, well, I have experienced anything like it since, but only when I've gone back into that same kind of environment. It was really an eye-opener. And I was after that, I was sold. So basically what I've been doing since is developing different programs, services, events for usually it's universities, sometimes peak bodies, sometimes government, around what they can do to make their operations more sustainable. So actually looking to cut emissions, usually looking at ways that they can embed climate issues in strategy and in their identity and into their programming. So that's Pomegranate, and that's great. But then there's CANI, which is the Climate Action Network for International Educators. So that's a non-profit that myself and a colleague from New Zealand, P. Tulia Nikula, who's an academic at EIT, we co-founded just over a year ago now. And the reason was that, it kind of started as an organic thing, which again is, I love that. That's kind of how things happen. There wasn't enough focus on the topic of climate change in our sector. So I kept trying to get, sessions at the major conferences and not really getting much luck. I'd get, the poster session that clashed with free drinks or a tiny little spot somewhere here. And so, but by doing that, I kind of found this group of people around the world who were also trying to do something similar. So I found Eddie West in California and Petulia in New Zealand and Marianne Mensah and Kevin McGann in France. And we started collaborating and putting in multiple session proposals together and putting our combined credibility and weight together towards these proposals, and then running events together. And so we started to see that there was demand, more people were coming, and then it just kind of gradually grew and grew from there. And now we've got a global board. We have around 2,000 people who regularly engage with us in different ways. We've just, next week we're having the leadership ballot for our European chapter, which has really taken off. And we've run 3 major online summits. We've run a webinar series on climate justice. And like you, we have a regular podcast, Carry Climate Dialogues. So please do, a little plug there, please do look us up on that one if you're interested. It looks at everything that is in the kind of intersection between climate change and international education. So that's been kind of beyond our wildest expectations, really. We thought there was the nub of an idea there, but we didn't know how much it would take off.
Which is fantastic when you see, an idea really take flight like that. And like, when we're talking together about it, you always light up, and it's like, we're getting all the, I'm meeting all these amazing people. And I think it's a really good reminder that things like climate change and big change is about people coming together and working collaboratively and sharing ideas. And it's not a competition. It's about how we can actually get the most together and learn from each other. And I think that you seem to do that really well in both elements, Pomegranate Global and also the Canny network. And it's really exciting to hear how it's grown in a relatively short period of time. So
yeah, thank you. And I mean, it's been so lovely to reconnect, and I love what you're doing with your business and your show as well. I mean, and I think we probably are both kind of good adverts for the Ashoka U crowd, because they're really, really taking their lessons to heart.
Yeah, well, I got my my idea for our Learn to Learn program was from when I was doing social innovation program, and going, that's what the problem is. We need to help our students learn how to learn. So it is amazing how that idea just comes, and sometimes you've just got to run with it and see where it takes you. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think especially after so long working in universities, which are so siloed, and and I get the reasons why, and obviously universities are wonderful institutions, but it can make it really hard to do something like this, which actually really does involve people from different disciplines, different skill sets, working across boundaries and just going, what needs to be done, let's do it. Universities are not really set up for that.
Yeah, and I think that goes with any large organisation. It's, you just have to find ways to make it work and how to work around it. And I think one of the big benefits of universities, apart from they get to work with students who are our future, is that it is okay to to collaborate on research across universities. There isn't that boundary there. And I think the more we can use that approach, the better it'll be for everyone. So that's really all the questions that I had for you today. Did you want to share some of the work that you're doing at the moment, some of perhaps the programs that are available for universities and other institutions, either for their staff or for their students?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So, through Pomegranate, we run climate action training sessions and workshops. So basically that can be tailored to professional staff, it can be tailored to students or to alumni, looking at what you can, wherever you are in the world, your little corner of it, how that might be contributing to emissions, what you can do both as an individual, but more importantly, we only look at the individual's actions so that we can then take it up to the more systemic level. And because so much of the kind of blame for climate change, or not blame, but so much of the responsibility gets hung on individuals. And sure, we should, all be aware of our own carbon footprints and try to live more sustainably, but that's not going to be what gets us over the line if we are going to really tackle it effectively. So we look very much at what you can do on a kind of bigger scale, wherever you are. We also, if you're an office or an organization, we look at the very practical steps that you can do to reduce your own emissions, perhaps by replacing physical events with virtual, or switching to digital marketing versus paper-based, and so on. And we also run employability programs or community engagement programs with with climate action at the heart of it. For CANI this year, we'll be running a number of events in Australia, New Zealand and the Pacific, in North America and in Europe, and we're hoping to expand even further. So if you are in Australia and New Zealand, this part of the world, we will be looking to set up a local chapter of CANI. So we have a number of events coming this year, targeting how to work with recruitment agents in a more sustainable way, how to run more climate-friendly marketing and recruitment practices on the international side, getting started with climate action kind of 101, and also a climate justice and international education conversation, getting that kicked off. What does that look like in this part of the world? But our big thing is actually going to be in November. So I'm sure many of your listeners know that the UN climate talks will be held in November this year, actually in Scotland as it happens, and just pure coincidence. And so it's called the COP26, and these are the most kind of critical talks since the Paris talks 6 years ago, which was where the countries of the world came together to agree the 1.5 to 2 degree temperature rise targets. Now, this is where everyone has, the rubber really kind of hits the road. We know that the next few years are critical, and governments are really going to be held to account, I will certainly hope, at these talks. So our plan is to hold the CANI COP26. So we're going to kind of mirror that and bring together the key players in our fields in international education from around the world, hopefully kind of hold their feet to the fire and get them to commit to more ambitious action as well. So that's our big one this year. So if anyone would like, it's really fabulous. And so if anyone anywhere in the world wants to get involved with CANI, please do get in touch. So we have a rudimentary website, which is currently being redeveloped, but it's still enough to get in touch with us. So it's CAN, that's Climate Action Network, -ie.org. And you can sign up there. Obviously, it's free. All of our events are free. We make sure that they're accessible to everyone. So we'd love to have more people getting involved.
Awesome. That would be great. And I have to say, having perused your websites and got involved, I'm like, God damn, why couldn't we have had some fun things like this to do when I was at uni? I'm particularly keen on the innovation challenge and the internships that you are involved in organising. I think that's a way of really, I guess, almost, hitting two birds with one stone. You kind of help people understand, but then it also gives them a lot more skills and understanding and networks that they can really leverage from. So
yeah, absolutely. I'm actually talking to a virtual internships company at the moment about how we can translate this into the virtual field and match students or student teams to companies to help them come up with a basic climate action plan. So small to medium-sized companies that might not be able to afford to go and get a full, sustainability audit done, but might still want some help and some ideas about what they can do.
That sounds awesome. Is there anything else that you wanted to add while you've got centre stage?
Pressure. Just, I suppose, one other kind of general plug for, it's not just for Canny, it could be for anything. But, this has obviously been a hard year for many people around the world, locked down, not able to see family, whatever it is, dealing with disruption in their workplaces. And what all of us involved in Canny have found is that although it's about climate change, it's been incredibly positive, and it's kind of been a mental health boost for all of us to, there's this dreadful thing happening, and it can feel, the climate change, the rising temperatures, climate breakdown, possibility of feedback loops, all of this. And the only way that I've found to actually, or a way to really kind of insulate yourself from some of that harm, is that psychic kind of trauma, is to get involved and do something about it. And it really feels positive. So I would really recommend to anybody to get involved, and it really is going to take all of us.
Yes, indeed. Well, thank you so much, Ailsa. It's been lovely having you here with us today. I will make sure that we include some of your links so people can easily get in contact. And again, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure having you here.
Thanks so much, Tanya. Really enjoyed it. It's been great. Thank you.